Radio TV phono nut here, and I'm going to show you how to go from a tube rectifier to solid state rectification, and we're going to use the old crusty Philco chassis that we resurrected to do that. Now normally when a piece of equipment uses a vacuum tube rectifier, I believe you really should use what the piece of equipment was designed for, but you may have some crusty old piece of equipment where you may not want to use a more expensive tube rectifier, or it may be something you need to get going in a hurry. It may not have access to the appropriate tube rectifier. So I'm going to show you how to go solid state and get your equipment back working. Now back in the day, and they may still make these, I don't know, they made these things that are called a solid state rectifier replacement for types 5AR4, 5U4, and 5Y3. Now this won't work in our Philco because it uses a 5Y4, and we'd have to rewire the socket to make this work. But even if it would work, we really don't want to do that. We really don't want to use this, and here's why. All that's in this base, this plug-in base, is a couple of silicon diodes. Now on our Philco, the schematic calls for 310 volts on the cathode of the 5Y4 rectifier. Now if we were just to go with a couple of silicon diodes as rectifiers, our B+ voltage would be much higher than that, which I will demonstrate here shortly. And the reason for that is because the tube rectifier is not nearly as efficient as the solid state rectifier, where you're going to have a good bit of voltage dropped across the tube rectifier, whereas a solid state rectifier, you've only got 0.7 volts dropped across it. Like I mentioned in another video, this particular plug-in doohickey was one that I took out of an organ amplifier that somebody asked me to repair. And that amplifier had a whole bunch of cooked parts in it. I don't know how long this solid state rectifier had been there, but it had been there long enough to cook some parts, and the B+ voltage was, I'm trying to remember, I'm thinking about 50 to 75 volts higher than what the schematic calls for. So after I replaced all the cooked parts and went back to a 5U4 rectifier tube, the B+ voltage was within spec, and it was happy, and I advised the owner not to ever stick one of these in there again. So how do we get around the high efficiency of the diodes? Well, we have to use a big dropping resistor to drop the excess voltage. Now I'll show you how to wire the diodes in circuit. Here's a basic power supply that's found in a lot of different pieces of tube equipment that uses a power transformer. This is the tube rectifier. We have our 6.3 volt winding that provides heater voltage to the other tubes. We have our 5 volt winding that provides our heater voltage to the filament of the rectifier tube. And then we have a center tapped high voltage winding, and the one in the Philco is 700 volts center tapped, so we have roughly 350 volts from this top of this winding to center tap, and 350 volts from the bottom end of this winding to center tap. And then the top end of our winding goes to rectifier tube plate number 1. The bottom end of our winding goes to rectifier tube plate number 2. And the center tap of the winding usually connects to B-. In some radios there's a voltage divider resistor there between center tap and the chassis to provide bias voltage, but for the sake of argument and for the sake of simplicity, we'll just connect the center tap to ground. And then our rectifier tube heater also doubles as the cathode, and coming off of that we have filter capacitor number 1 going into a filter choke, and then filter capacitor number 2, and then we have our filtered high voltage DC B+ voltage here. Now, to convert to solid state, we of course need to remove the rectifier tube, and then the top end of the center tapped winding, the center tapped high voltage winding, will connect to the anode of one diode, and then the bottom end of the high voltage winding will connect to the anode of the other diode. Now, the anode is the unmarked or unbanded end, and then you will tie the two cathodes together, which is the end that's marked with the band on it, and then we'll have a resistor between the tied together cathodes of the diode and your first filter capacitor. Now, what value resistor do we need? Well, that will have to be determined, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a few minutes. Now, as far as selecting a diode, we generally use 1N4007s, which I believe have a peak reverse voltage rating of 1,000 volts and can handle up to 1 amp of forward current. Generally, that's ample for the average radio, TV, record player repair work, but if you're working on a high voltage circuit that requires higher voltage and or higher current, then you need to use an appropriate diode. You don't want to use one that's underrated because it will short out on you. Now, in order to do this, we need a few things to make our job easier. The first thing we need is a variable AC power supply that can go from 0 up to line voltage, the full line voltage. This can be a variac or an isolated supply like the Heathkit model that I use. And then you'll need a multimeter that's capable of measuring voltage, current, and resistance, and I think most multimeters are capable of that. And then you'll need a calculator and a pen and paper to make notations on, and that should get you in business. Now, what I'm going to do here, I've busted the glass off of the original rectifier tube that was a dud in the Philco, and we're going to wire our replacement diodes and resistor to the base of that rectifier. Okay, I've wired the diodes into the base of the old defective rectifier tube. As I've said before, the schematic calls for 310 volts. We're inputting about 85 volts AC to the radio, and that gives us 313 volts, which is close enough for government work. Now, just to show you how much higher the B plus is with step full 120 volt line, I'm going to crank it up briefly and show you what the B plus voltage is. That's 404 volts. Wait, I'm not even quite up to 120. 409 volts. Yeah, that's almost 100 volts higher than what we need to be, according to what the schematic says. Okay, we're just going to say 315. That's going to be my benchmark that I want to. That's the number I want to aim for when I'm running 120 volts into this. And in order to do that, we're going to need a big dropping resistor. Okay, so we have about 410 volts of B plus at the cathode of the rectifier. When we're inputting 120 volts AC, when we're inputting 85 volts AC, we're getting 315 volts of B plus at the cathode of the rectifier. So we want to subtract the desired voltage, which is 315 volts, minus the voltage we're actually getting at 120 volts AC line, which is 410 volts, and that leaves us 95 volts. That's how much voltage we need to drop. Now, with the radio's AC input set to give us 315 volts B plus, I need to break this line here, this B plus, and I have it conveniently fixed to do that. All I have to do is unsolder the yellow wire going to the diodes there, and we need to insert our milliamp meter there and see how much current we're drawing. Okay, we have our B plus connection broken, and we have our amp meter, milliamp meter placed in the circuit there, and we're drawing 33 milliamps. So just for ease of doing things, we'll just round that up to 35 milliamps. Okay, so we need to figure out the resistance as well as the power handling capacity in watts that the resistor needs to be able to handle. So in order to figure out the resistance, we use Ohm's law. Resistance equals voltage divided by current. In this case, our voltage is what we want to drop, which is 95 volts, divided by the amount of current draw that we measured, which is 35 milliamps, or 0.035 amps. So we divide 95 by 0.035, and that gives us 2.7 K. So that takes care of the resistance value. And power in watts equals current I times voltage E, and in this case 0.035 amps, which is what we measured, times 95 volts, which is what we want to drop, and that gives us 3.325 watts. So we'd want to go up to the next available wattage resistor, which would be 5 watts. So I'd want to use at least a 5 watt, maybe a 10, maybe a 20, maybe a 25, just whatever I can come up with. Okay, I dug through my box of old resistors and found a 2.5K and a 220 ohm that we can wire in series to get us 2.7K, and that should solve our B plus problem. Alright, here's the kludged up rectifier replacement, and like I said in the resurrection video, this is not made to be pretty. This is made to work. Well, I don't know what happened to my calculations, but that resistor combination I used gave us a voltage of about 226 volts, which is too low. So I just, instead of fooling with the math, I just started substituting values. I found a 1K ohm, but the wattage was a little bit underrated. That gave us our ideal voltage. So I found 1.2K ohms, 20 watt, and that gives us 295 volts B plus, and that's fine.
It resulted in him being charged with 42 counts.
That's just fine. Now another advantage to using a dropping resistor between the diode and the first filter capacitor is, if you don't use the diode when you first energize the circuit, the filter capacitor is going to act like a dead short for an instance, and that's why when we turn on a piece of equipment with no kind of surge current limiting, this amp meter pegs for a second. However, with this 1.2K ohm resistor in place, that absorbs that excess surge, so we don't peg the meter when we turn the equipment on, and that makes things a little bit better for the diodes. But yeah, I'm going to have to go back and recheck my calculations and see why that didn't come out right. And I also noticed with our dropping resistor in place, the amount of current that the radio is drawing while in operation is not as much. See, we're down in this area, whereas before we were kind of up in the midpoint region here. And if this was something that I was going to do for a permanent installation, I would probably leave the dud tube in place for looks, and we would mount a terminal strip under the chassis if space permitted, and mount our rectifier and dropping resistor under there out of sight. Okay, all these bogus calculations, I could have just deleted that portion of the video and moved on, made it look like I'm some kind of super genius, but I'm not going to do that because these kind of things happen to everybody at some point in time. And looking at these calculations and thinking, 35 milliamps does seem a bit low for a radio with a 6F6 output stage in it. You know, I've seen little battery operated radios that, you know, had a output of maybe 100 or 150 milliwatts that, you know, ran 17, 18, 20 milliamps of B plus current. So need to check into my meter and see what's going on there. And as far as this wattage, that seems too low too. You know, 3 watts to drop roughly 95 volts. It probably around 80 to 100 milliamps actually. Yeah, that would be too low. And that 20 watt resistor is getting rather warm. Not as hot as it's capable of getting and still holding its own, but I'm feeling more than 3.5 watts of power being dissipated there, so we need to check this again and try to determine why my calculations went haywire. Interesting, now we're reading 52 milliamps. So I'm wondering if this meter, even though it's a fairly new meter, I wonder if it's not right. Alright, 0.052, I set it to amps just to see what it would read on that scale, but that does sound more plausible. So yeah, under load makes a difference from the way we were doing it earlier. With the resistor in place, we have 365 volts coming out of the diodes before we go into the resistor, and then coming out of the resistor we have 295 volts, and then we measured 52 milliamps of current draw there, and plugging all those figures into Ohm's law, that gets us a 1300 and something ohms, which is about what that resistor measures, and 3 point something watts. So I guess that really is only 3 watts of power there being dissipated by that resistor, but it still gets rather warm. So yeah, you know, you can use Ohm's law to kind of get you in the ballpark, but you know, with based on loads of the circuit that can throw you off, probably one of the best things to do is just to keep an assortment of high wattage wire wound resistors on hand, say values from 68 ohms up to a couple of thousand ohms, and then just do trial and error until you find one that's close to what you need it to be. Oh, and I forgot to show you in the last resurrection video where I went ahead and hacked in some line bypass capacitors, one here across this side of the line and one here across the other side of the line. You can see we have plenty of black electrical tape to insulate our connections and to insulate frayed spots in the speaker cable. And on the filter capacitors, you know, we need to do that because, you know, black electrical tape lives matter, and we should use as much of it as we can in our resurrections. Okay, I kept spraying contact cleaner and oil on that volume control shaft and kept working it back and forth with the vice grips. It's not nearly as smooth as a new control, but at least I can turn it with the knob in place now. Now this band selector, it's just a lost cause, and there's really no need in worrying about it because all that's on that other band is the police band anyway. It's very little, if anything, on it anymore. Now as far as this diode fiasco, I'll admit that in the past when I needed to replace a tube or a selenium rectifier with a diode, which I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've replaced a vacuum tube with a diode, and you know why, I've already mentioned that before. But when I have done it, I always just took an educated guess as to what value resistor to use and just kept installing the different value resistors until I came up with one that gave me close to the right V plus voltage. So I just decided to try the Ohm's Law method today, and that would probably work ordinarily, but whenever you've got the circuit placing a load on the power supply, and that load is often different depending on how much B+ voltage is present, so it just kind of messes up things. And with the fact that we have a bunch of old capacitors in here that still have high voltage on them that could be breaking down, that could also affect our load. So, like I said, really, if you're not an electronics engineer, the best way to do this is just to get you a bunch of wire wound power resistors of various resistance values, and start out high and keep working your way down until you find a value that fits your needs. Or you could get a high-powered wire wound rheostat and do the same thing with that, just adjust the rheostat to you get the right voltage, and then measure the resistance of the rheostat, and then pick a wire wound resistor that's close to what you measure. Don't you like sitting here watching me twist the volume control knob? I also got some glue on the speaker, trying to, that speaker's never going to sound right. There's just too much rust and crud down in the air gap, but maybe I can make it sound a little better. Well, I put it all back in the cabinet. I was going to listen to it out here, turned it on. Tubes light up, absolutely no sound, so I pulled the cover off of the speaker to where I can access the terminals, and I want to see if we're getting any B+ voltage to the output transformer, see if all that's okay. Alright, I've got high voltage on all three of those terminals. All of the coils are intact, and when I touch the grid of the first audio tube, I get nothing. What do you want to bet the voice coil has opened up on the speaker? Yep, that's what happened. Voice coil opened.
In retirement, State Bulldog baseball team. Van Dock is a big supporter of Mississippi Urbans and
But yeah, this radio don't sound half bad with a,
for birthdays,
and it would sound even better with a bigger speaker on it.
Ferdy's discount.
Well, a few years back, I picked up a bunch of junk from the TV station. They had a junk floor up there where everything got deposited. And I picked up this old wall box, speaker box, that has a Quam speaker and looks like some kind of audio amplifier in it. That speaker looks like I might could plug it into the Philco and it would sound better. And since I have no money in it, so let's get it out. Found this inside on an ECG 1027 13-watt audio frequency power amplifier. I bet this is something that they built out of whatever parts they had on hand. That's back when engineers knew how to build electronic circuits and troubleshoot electronic circuits. Now, not saying all of them, but the old-style broadcast engineers are about to become a thing of the past. So many of them now are what you'd call IT guys. Yep, that's exactly what this is, an amplifier that somebody built using an STK module. We'll hang on to it. We might find a creative use for it for something around here. Well, now I'm just reminded that these Philco speakers are an odd size. They're just a tad bit bigger than a standard size speaker, and come to think of it, I remember reading and hearing the disgust from old radio repairmen that a standard size speaker wouldn't fit because Philco used a custom speaker that was not a standard size that's easily available. Okay, here we are. Now, let me emphasize, this is not the correct way to do this. What I have done here was kept the original speaker field coil and the output transformer as is, and just simply disconnected the old dead speaker voice coil and attached our donor speaker which is one that came out of an old console record player. The comb was busted on it, but I patched it up with glue and it seems to be holding okay. I had to do a little filing in the speaker mounting holes to make it fit, but as you can see, we got it in there. But no, the proper way to do this, if this was something I really cared about, would be to completely remove the original speaker from the equation, replace the field coil with either a big power resistor. It's approximately the same resistance as the original field coil, or replace it with a filter choke. And depending on what kind of choke we could find, we might have to put a resistor in series with the choke. And usually when you replace the field coil with a resistor, you also have to up the value of the filter capacitors to compensate for the filter choke that is no longer in circuit. But since this is one we don't care about, we're just going to leave it like it is, and I'm probably just going to bolt the old speaker to the underside here and be done with it. Now, of course, the field coil or the audio output transformer could open up at any time. If it does, it just does. I really don't care.
For example, let's just say it was the other way around, and Asian Americans were horribly attacking with knives and hammers. There was a video the other day, an Asian woman hit over the head with a hammer in New York City. Hit over the head with a hammer. If all of these cases featured Asians attacking innocent black victims, you think we'd be talking about that? Or would they protect the identity of the perpetrators? Because I don't know about you, it seems pretty clear to me that the race, the ethnicity, the identity even of the perpetrators is a conversation we should be having, right?
Say, and what shall I more say?
Here today, like I don't know anymore.
Talk about it, Lise. Let's try. It's a tough issue, no question about it. 1-800-655-MIKE. Glad to have you here on a Friday episode of the Mike Gallagher Show.
Okay, this thing's not going to be a DX magnet, but with a long wire antenna, it does okay with local stations. Okay, I bolted the speaker to the underside of the cabinet
Use the code COOKOUT in
and
the
just ran the wires from the dead voice coil to our replacement speaker here. Bill 670's coming in very weakly, so it's not in that bad a shape.
To be commemorated on September 26th, Francis emphasized that a fracturing of we has become evident amid the COVID-19 pandemic, and
there's something else weak.
2.5% in March over February when adjusted for seasonal and calendar factors.
You can run from move 3.
I think that's 1490, the little country station. So that's not too bad. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's just a image of 1010 coming in at the top end of the dial. You know, this thing still has old bypass capacitors and such in it, so that could be the reason for that. And like I've already said, this thing could be made to operate better, but it would require a full going over, and that's not something I'm going to do to this.
championship.
Dan Heiss with the Taylors, and you're listening to WMER Radio 93.1 FM, 1390.
This was going to be the...
Actually, that's 1390 and 1010 coming in on top of each other.
No.
Meet all safety standards. You won't find long lines and crowded spaces here, and our staff is the best in the industry. We promise to take good care.
All right, there you go. That's about all I've got for this thing for now.
Talk station, AM 1010, WMOX. This is the Mike Gallagher Show.
They don't want the flow to stop. Everything they've done so far is to tell immigrants, come in, we'll find a way to place you around the country. Yeah, a wink and a nod.
Hospitalizations down, cases are down. So things are going exceedingly well here in America. They don't want to let you know it, but it's time to get back to work.
Now, from the ReliefFactor.com studios, here's Mike Gallagher.
There's sort of an existential battle within the Republican Party, which is...
Okay, we've been on about 5 hours, and it's playing well. Power transformer is just barely warm after all this time.
And free health care for current and former players. All these things were agreed to.
And on that note, that's one of the advantages of solid-state rectification. You lose the...
an off-site with facility.
5Y3 filament, which draws what, 1 or 2 amps? I don't know. I'd have to look it up in a tube manual, but it's a current hog, and
you have no leverage. You have a signed agreement.
You know, that's just that much less load on the power transformer, which will let it run cooler.
The Lakers made a slight amendment. Was first.
Now I need to find some old scrap wood or something to stabilize this cabinet where it can stand up on its own. I really don't care how tacky it looks. This cabinet's pretty rough anyway. Of course, in all fairness, if it wasn't for that rotten bottom portion of the cabinet, the rest of it, besides the bad finish, is not in too bad a shape. It's just the bottom end that's rotten as I don't know what.
At cutting a guy for that said reason. Jets defensive lineman Quinnen Williams.
And then once I get the cabinet stabilized, I can just chalk paint the whole thing and put it on Facebook Marketplace for $600, and some hipster will come by it. Well, we put in about 9 hours straight, no problems. I even left it unattended for a great deal of time. That should make some people really cringe, especially since a good many of the original caps are still in there. Maybe I should have left a Crosley Cruiser sitting on top of it in case the radio did decide to burst into flames. It would have taken the Crosley with it.
He's going more than, he's under, probably around 60 pitches maybe. Yeah, he's got 25 more to go, or more. Maybe 50s right now. High fly ball.
Yeah, it just amazes me that this old stuff like this can go through Hades and back and then still work again with relatively little effort. And given what all this thing has been through, I really didn't have to do a whole lot to it, as you saw, to get it to this point. I think that's the classic country station out of Monroe, Louisiana. Need to crank that up and give the Thuggies with their gangster rap a little something in retaliation. Alright, it's getting to be about dark 30, and I guess that's as good a time as any to call it a day.
Joe Biden.
Alright, I jake-legged the cabinet by attaching a piece of hardboard or whatever this is called to the side where it'll stand up on its own. It needs a brace to go across the bottom there, but I don't have anything here to do that, and I'm not worried about it. I'm going to stick this on Facebook Marketplace, try to get about 35 out of it. That ought to cover my investment. And if nobody wants to give me that for it, then I'll pull the chassis out and throw the cabinet in the garbage. You know, one thing I've learned, you know that rustic look, that rustic falling apart look is acceptable with everything except old radios. You know, old radios, it has to look perfect, but anything else, it can be a rusted out piece of crap and people go crazy for it. Yeah, we have all these little holes in the cabinet. I don't know if those are worm holes or termite holes or whatever they are, but we've had our fun with it, and this thing is fixing to go out of here. Not worrying with it no more.
You an alert. You have access to a dedicated restoration specialist if you become...
On that note, I think he was just talking about Trump being banned from Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The other day I got a message from Facebook saying that they had to remove a post from mine from 2017 because it violated their community standards and it promoted suicide, and they gave me a tab to click on if I was feeling suicidal and needed help. Well, I'm not feeling suicidal, but if I was and wanted help, I think I could seek out a local professional. I wouldn't be seeking help through Facebook. But the post that they removed was a butthurt removal meme. It depicted a device with a guy sticking his finger in the device and plugging the device into an electrical outlet. In fact, I'll put a picture of it at the end of this video, but yeah, they deleted that and gave me a 30-day suspension from selling anything and going live. Well, I never go live anyway, and it's just about impossible to sell anything in this hellhole where I live anyway. Certainly anything like this. And then I reposted the meme again, and within an hour they took it off again and escalated my sentence to 60 days from doing those things I just mentioned. Well, I think I can get around the selling thing. I just won't create the post as a for sale post. I'll just create it as a discussion post and let it go at that. But, you know, Facebook has gotten so liberalistic, communistic, it's just not even, if it wasn't for a few family members that I otherwise don't have any way to get in touch with, I would dump Facebook. I'd be through with it. But
get a wide variety of all your
it's just gotten to the point where everybody's so offended by everything, and people will report posts that they don't like instead of acting like an adult and actually contacting the person who posted the thing. No, they got to take the chicken shit way out and report the person.
According to various news articles,
you know, if I post something on my page that somebody is that torn up over, I don't know that I would take it off, but I'd feel a lot better about the person if they just simply contacted me and told me what was up instead of pulling some secretive crap because they know I won't be able to see them. But anyway, enough ranting about that. The radio is resurrected.
Rodents and pests away, the more humane way without...
And it's about all we're going to do to this. I really have not had any time to do much with electronics. There's just been so much going on here, which I won't get into all of that. Just hadn't had time to devote much in the shop. So I got a few breaks here, there, and yonder, so I decided to do a little more to this to try to get it out of here. And one way or another, it is going out of here.
And forget.
Every day supports the family of officers killed in the line of duty. Be safe every day. Please support law enforcement. The Gallagher's Heroes Fallen Officer Fund. Go to Gallagher's Heroes. Never leave me alone.
November 21st at Jacksonville on. It is a lot of dysfunction. It is a lot of rebuilds. You got the Houston, you got Atlanta, you got...
And supports the family of officers killed in the line of duty. Be safe every day. Please support law enforcement. The Gallagher's Heroes Fallen Officer Fund. Go to Gallagher's Heroes.
November 21st at Jacksonville on. It is a lot of dysfunction. It is a lot of rebuilds. You got the Houston, you got Atlanta, you got...
Well, not quite finished yet. I remembered that I had this Philco that I've had for ages. The cabinet has been redone at some point, and I did some work on the chassis umpteen years ago, but I probably need to go back in it. Not now. I do not have time to devote to this right now, but at some point I need to go back in it and, shall we say, restore it. But this has the same chassis as that console set had in it, only this one's in much better shape. As you can see, this chassis is not a rust bucket. Oh, and by the way, I sold the console, put it on Facebook Marketplace, and a guy I know sent me a message and said, I want it. And he paid me the $35 that I wanted for it, which is about what I had in it. That's all I wanted to do was get my investment back. So he said he didn't care that it looked like trash. He was going to clean it up a little bit and put it in his house for displays. I'm like, okay, whatever. Glad to get it out of my way.
Quarterback situation is
this radio, when I turned it on a while ago, it came on at maximum volume, even with the volume control all the way down, so I gave it a good slap, and it started behaving. So, yeah, we do need to look into this one day, but like I said, not now.
Put your seatbelt on here. You ready? Heading back. And I'll never be here, you're big.
Strategic Branding and Marketing Agency.
Insurance company. From Repair Home makes them up. Sleep Number 360 Smart Bed is the only bed that effortlessly adjusts.
We'll take best of the best here in the 228 area code. Check out 228awards.com and click on winners. There's over 200 listings of what was voted great in the 228. You can see them all right now at 228awards.com. Enjoy your stay, and thanks for checking out 106.3 Casino Radio.
From Silver Slipper to the Golden Nugget and all the casinos in between, we've got everything you need to know to make your visit to the Mississippi Gulf Coast a great one. 106.3 Casino Radio.
While the coast. So now we have a radio station that airs nothing but casino programming. That's enough to turn it off on. And on that note, I'll show you some things that just acquired. I've had these Time Life LPs for a while. I just got the CDs in today. They were a cheap eBay purchase. This is the Time Life Your Hit Parade series. The War Years 41, 42, 43, 44, and 45. On LP, I've got 47, 48, the early 50s, 52, 56, 58, 59. And I've got some CDs coming that I got cheap off of eBay to fill in those missing years. And once we get all that in, we're gonna copy all this into the computer. Pretty soon I'm probably going to be buying a new desktop computer, and I'm going to use the old computer as a playout computer for my upcoming Part 15 station. You know, we can load all of this late 30s through 50s, early 60s big band, pop vocal, MOR, whatever you want to call it, all rolled into one. Load all that into the computer and play it out over the transmitter and have something worthwhile to listen to instead of the type of dreck that you just heard whenever I was tuning through the stations on this radio. And today we had an event called Antique Alley. That's where they set up on the side of the road and sell things. It starts here in Mississippi and goes all the way up through Virginia. Last year they canceled it because of COVID. The year before that I couldn't go because of a scheduling conflict, and I was sure that this year it would be gangbusters, but I was wrong. I was very disappointed in it. Actually, I didn't buy a single thing. There were not nearly as many vendors there, and what radios I saw were just junky, overpriced sets. There was a little 5-tube beat-up clock radio from the mid-60s. They wanted $25 for that. They wanted $35 for a beat-up, wooden-cased Motorola AM/FM solid-state clock radio from the mid-60s. There was a Clarion radio record player phonograph from the late 40s that someone had replaced the original 78 changer with a 3-speed or 4-speed VM changer from the 70s. That actually belonged to somebody I know, and he asked me what price to put on it. I told him start at $50 and take whatever somebody offers you. If somebody offers you $15 or $20, take it and get rid of it. Then I saw a crusty old cookie cutter 78 RPM phonograph and radio console from the late 40s. I could have got that for $30. The nicest thing I saw was a Pincrest. I'm pretty sure it was solid state. Looked to be from probably about 66, 67, probably made by Wells Gardner. It was a large console stereo. It looked to be in pretty decent shape. It didn't work. I could have probably got it for $40 or $50, but we were in my friend's Camry, so wasn't no way to bring it home and no place to put it if I brought it home. In fact, had I brought it home, then the folks around here would have been reading my obituary in the paper. But when I got home, another friend called and said he bought something out there for me if I wanted it. He bought a record player that belonged to the former owners of a racetrack here. They owned it from 66 until 83, and from what he described, it sounds like a 45 RPM record player that they had patched into the PA system, and every time before a race they would play the national anthem from a 45 RPM record. And he said when they sold the racetrack in 1983, they unplugged the record player from the system and hung on to it. And my friend bought it for $10 and said if I wanted it for that I could have it. So I told him that I'd love to have it. But as far as flea markets and yard sales, I used to enjoy going to them, but not so much anymore, because you go to the flea markets and it's just the same junk that's been there month after month. And if you see an old radio or something that they want some fantasy price for a beat-up piece of junk, you go to a yard sale, all that's there is old particle board furniture and toys and baby clothes and crap that nobody wants, or at least I don't want. And if you ask about records or old radios, they either look at you like you're crazy or you have to hear about something they have in the house, but oh, it's highly collectible, and I'm not going to just let it go for a yard sale price. But enough of my rambling. We had fun resurrecting the trashed out Philco console and found it another home. And one day we'll devote time to getting this nicer example of the table model version back to its full operating glory.